In the 1919 uprising against British occupation, Coptic priests gave speech in mosques, while Muslim ulama gave speeches in churches. The trend continued until the 1952 revolution. Thereafter, the new revolutionary regime did not base its positions towards its citizens on the basis of their religious identities, but rather on the basis of their political stance with or against the new revolution, as well as later on their social status and economic wealth, particularly as a de facto one-party political system emerged in Egypt at that time. So after 1952 revolution, the political life has dramatically changed in Egypt. The post-revolutionary regime tended to control most of the state institutions, and Egyptian citizens, whether Muslims or Copts, had to live under that virtual one-party system and were denied the advantages of a Western liberal type of democracy which partly prevailed before the revolution, including full political participation, and came under the strong grip of the state's authorities, being prevented from a liberal democratic type of government and subject to strong control by the state and its institutions. On the other hand, we witnessed after the death of late President Nasser and the coming of late President Sadat in 1970, a new polarization in the Egyptian society. Late President Sadat reintroduced Islamist trends to the political equation after their virtual neutralization under late President Nasser. Politically, President Sadat wanted to balance the influence of leftist and Nasserite opposition to his rule by conservative elements and movements through allowing Islamist and other conservative forces to play a more important role in Egyptian politics. However, in few years' time, these movements realized that they have been more or less being manipulated by the political regime and used to serve specific target by the ruler, particularly as they faced serious restrictions on their effective political participation, in addition to the failure of the late President Sadat at that time to undertake domestic and foreign policies that would be in line with the orientations of these movements, such as the decision to sign the peace treaty with Israel in March 1979 and receiving in Egypt the last Shah of Iran, Muhammad Reza Pahlavi, in the same year, 1979, after the revolution in his country. Both magnified the antagonism between the late President Sadat and Islamist-oriented movements. During the same period, 1970s, we had witnessed for the first time, maybe since the 50s, the resurfacing of incidents projected as sectarian strife, starting with Al-Khanka incident. In a political system where people felt isolated from the policy-making process of their country due to the lack of due representation in legislative and executive branches of government, and did not witness peaceful transfer of power, the safe haven would have been normally religious affiliation, where extremists on both sides rechanneled the frustration of their fellow believers and planted the seeds of hatred towards and denial of the other. In such political environment, religious or sectarian problems tend by nature to get oversized and misinterpreted, leading to misidentification of the problem from being a comprehensive political problem to being a problem of discrimination and one group of the population's underrepresentation. As a result, some Egyptian Coptic activists started during that time to articulate some demands in order to improve the status, according to their point of view, of their fellow Copts. These demands included more representation in executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government, including particularly in senior posts and sensitive institutions. It also included more equality in promotions in the government, state bureaucracy, in the public sector, in academic institutions, as well as the military and security institutions. It also included demanding the removal of religious identifications from official government documents. It included the equality between mosques and churches in getting licensing procedures for their construction or renovation. And it included as well a more vigorous enforcement of the Constitution's guarantee for equality among Egyptian citizens in rights and duties. Finally, these activists demanded greater emphasis on Coptic heritage and history in school curricula, as well as teaching the values of pluralism. This was happening in this period starting from the 70s in Egypt. And we have to maybe now move to the global perspective. The global perspective witnessed a very significant transformation after the end of the Cold War in 1991 and the collapse and disintegration not only of the Soviet Union and Eastern Bloc, but a major retreat in communist ideology and what was perceived as communist threat to the West. As a result of the end of the Cold War, we witnessed the rise of the claim that Islam generates conflict in international relations. We witnessed equally counter-arguments, not only by Islamic scholars, but also some scholars in the West, trying to undermine and deny this argument. This came, of course, after the very famous book of Samuel Huntington, Clash of Civilizations, where he asserted that Islam has what he called, quote-unquote, bloody borders, and predicted that the dynamics of civilizational conflict in the post-Cold War era would reinforce and intensify this phenomenon. Particularly, he predicted the confrontation between Islam and the West as inevitable. His analysis is part of his larger notion of clash of civilization. However, he focused it, as I mentioned, on the prediction of Islam-Western confrontation. He had three elements, basically, in this argument. The first is that the post-Cold War conflict will not be anymore one of political ideologies, but one of civilizations based on religion. A second element was that conflicts involving Islamic civilization will be particularly widespread and violent. His third element was that Islamic civilization would be the greatest threat, not only to Western civilization in a cultural manner, but to the liberal and democratic values of this civilization. While many, if not all, of Huntington's arguments have been controversial, his arguments concerning Islam had found acceptance among some Western circles of policymakers, academicians, and media people. This, throughout the time, has proven that it is, in some cases, making Huntington's predictions a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because if many Westerners expect Islam to be the threat and are disposed to perceive such a threat, whether it exists in reality or not, then the expectation may influence policy orientation and formulation. I'll go back to Egypt, if you allow me, and with all due respect to the very outstanding and honorable speakers and guests today, Professor Zuhaili and Professor Al-Hawari, I would say just a few words about the role of Al-Azhar al-Sharif in Egypt. This, I'll give it as an example to what we can call the official religious institution. I mentioned earlier there's Al-Azhar al-Sharif on the Islamic side and the Coptic Church, but I'll focus here about the role of Al-Azhar al-Sharif. Al-Azhar al-Sharif has been established, as I mentioned, in the 10th century AD. It both combined being a mosque and, at the beginning, a madrasa, school, and later, of course, university, which we can consider the first university in not only in Islamic world, but worldwide. The role of Al-Azhar was extended over time, particularly in its early period, also to being a center of Arabic language learning and literature. Although Al-Azhar originally was established by the Fatimi Shi'i Sevener dynasty, which actually established Cairo itself as a city and Al-Azhar al-Sharif, they called Al-Azhar because in reference to the daughter of Prophet Muhammad, be peace upon him, Fatima radiallahu anha, and her name was also Az-Zahra. So that's the origin of the name. Az-Zahra means the brilliant or the brightening. And this name of Al-Azhar was in her honor. Studies at Al-Azhar began in the month of Ramadan. And this was in the year 975 AD. At the beginning, it had faculties of Islamic law and jurisprudence, of Arabic grammar, Islamic astronomy, and even Islamic philosophy and logic. In the 12th century, and following the overthrow of the Shi'i Fatimi dynasty from Egypt, Sultan al-Nasir Salah ad-Din, known in the Western literature as Saladin, and the founder of the Sunni Ayyubi dynasty, converted Al-Azhar to a Shafi'ite Sunni center of preaching and learning. Throughout its history, Al-Azhar mission has included the propagation of Islamic religion and culture. To this end, its Islamic scholars, known as the ulama, render religious judgments, fatwas, on disputes and requests submitted to them from all over the Islamic world regarding the proper conduct for Muslim individuals and societies. Al-Azhar has also trained Egyptian preachers in preaching, da'wah. Later, it also trained Muslim preachers from other nationalities all over the Muslim world. Its library today is considered the second richest and most important library in Egypt, only after the National Egyptian Library for Documentation and Archives. Under the late Sheikh Mahmoud Shaltut, who was Sheikh of Al-Azhar in the 1960s, Al-Azhar undertook important initiatives to initiate dialogue between Sunni Muslims and Shi'i Muslims, and to this effect, acknowledged the Shi'i 12-er Ja'fari doctrine and incorporated it in its teachings and learning. Although Al-Azhar University concerns itself with religious syllabus, meaning Quranic sciences and traditions and Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, on the one hand, it also started in the 1960s to teach modern sciences. According to Al-Azhar Reform Law number 103 in 1961, new colleges of applied sciences such as medicine and engineering were introduced. These new faculties were not supposed to be duplicates of their counterparts in the national universities in Egypt, because they combine these empirical sciences with religious sciences.